So I want to kick it off with this question of efficiency or opportunity. It feels like, despite those numbers that we saw, a lot of the conversation still is about cost savings, efficiency, doing what we already do just faster. What are some of the bigger opportunities that you guys are already seeing? And Brian, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks. It's fascinating. I get to wake up in the morning with 9,000 colleagues, about half recruiters, half consultants, scientists, engineers who operate on people, who help find them jobs, who help them lead better and coach better and be better in the workplace. And this is a group that's getting up in the morning, reading articles about the death of their industry, the death of recruiting, the death of consulting. Certainly a lot of my KPMG colleagues are in the same bucket. And especially given your comment about how fast this is now accelerating, I can't solve this from the center. This is my opportunity to engage the voices of 9,000 very proud, emotional, competent, experienced people who help other people and engage them in the challenge of how do they increase their reach and how do they increase their impact. It's causing us to reevaluate how we add value at the end of the day. I grew up at Price Waterhouse in the many years ago, and a mentor told me 50% of the time they hire us is because we have skills they don't have, and 50% of the reason why a client hires us is because they don't have time to do or inclination to do what we need done. So assuming that latter half is out of the picture, we are reevaluating the purpose of the organization. Are we only relevant when the decision is a human's in play? And engaging every one of our colleagues in that conversation to discover where we can disrupt. It's been an incredible motivator for the organization, but it's also illustrating every one of those challenges that you put up on the board, because we can't wait for all of these problems to be solved in order to get started. And for a company that's a mid-sized, small cap public company, that's a really interesting intersection.
Well, I think it's interesting that sort of another way to frame part of your answer, not to put words in your mouth, is you're going all the way to the foundations of what are we here for, and asking that sort of question, which I think is incredibly important, because it's easy to get lost in just sort of new capabilities as, shiny new thing. We could build this thing. I think there's something profound and important about asking, like, all right, in this new context, what are we actually meant to do? What do we serve?
So just on that, it's kind of in the framing of the question. It talks about efficiency. But faster horses are still faster, right? There's some really good opportunity there. Obviously, we don't want to stop there. But we had Lauren on stage talking about the things we're doing in marketing. We were able to not just, but unlocking, being able to get more capacity through actually lets us serve a lot more people than we were able to serve with our creative services team, and a lot faster, which then puts us in position to have a better answer out to and if you scale that across everything we're doing, that mindset, faster horses are really important. We do want to always keep, we recommend to clients do the same thing we're doing ourselves, right? Look across the entire enterprise, from how you market and sell services, how you deliver your services, what your services are, and how you run the firm or run the company, the back office. But also leave enough space for disruption thinking too, like Brian talked about, that it is hard for people to think about disruption, right? And to think about, like, what's the opportunity? What markets can I move into that I haven't been in? What are clients going to likely demand there? Also, who's potentially, keep your eye towards what's coming, because there's a lot of really interesting new capabilities coming that could potentially disrupt what you do. So I think that can turn into a real negative story, but we always want to spin that to the positive. What's the opportunity? And I liked how you framed it, Brian.
I'll just add that I always like to go back to the iron triangle, faster, better, cheaper, and the old adage, pick two. And I think with AI, you get to pick all three. And just as an example for us at Fannie Mae, where I lead the AI program, one common pattern I see over and over again in our business is places where in the old days before GPT, we were doing a lot of spot checking. And in the new world, we look at everything, and we're really looking for exceptions.
Yeah.
And so when we manage our business, we have a much fuller understanding of end-to-end how our business flows. We can manage it much more actively and effectively. We can manage the risk better because we see everything, because we run everything through a computer. and therefore we can just find the places where we need to apply human intelligence and really to drive better decision making.
You know, that's a funny thing. We didn't talk about this, so I know I'm going off mission a little here, but you know, we've seen actually a real unlock for traditional AI at this time too, which is a little bit of what you know, some of what you're talking about is, like for example, in our audit business, we don't look at some of the journal entries like on sampling. We'll look at 100% of them, yeah. Right? And that and it's easier to do now than it ever was to prepare the data, get things in line. But that's like a completely different opportunity. Like there's a different service that you're offering at that point, right?
Yeah, I do think that one of the things that can happen, and we see this frequently, is there's so much that's changing that people get sort of transfixed and they don't just do the obvious thing. And so I think it is an important caveat to the efficiency opportunity conversation. Basically, Steve, what you were saying, which is, you know, don't not do the efficiency thing because you know that there's some bigger opportunity. Do that and then, you know. Let's talk about what it looks like when you actually start to do this, like when you put these things into practice. As agents are moving from pilot to production, what are the types of challenges in particular? I think maybe let's start with what's breaking in the org chart. Where are kind of roles getting confused or complicated? Maybe we'll start with you, Steve.
Sure. So I'll give you a simple example of a workflow we've been playing around with, which is if you want to do business with Fannie Mae, we have a pretty thick guide that you have to follow. So if you want to sell a loan to us, you have to make sure you follow the rules. And we get lots of calls into our call center asking for clarification on what our policy is on particular qualification issues, for example. And again, we review those. We make sure that our agents are answering them accurately. But in the new world, we can listen to every call, right? And we can do 100% quality control. And not only that, we can look at the places in our guide where the ambiguity is coming from, because we can take all of those calls and cluster them into categories in an AI workflow, right? And then look for the places in our guide where those questions are coming from, and then use AI to rewrite that guide, and then bring that guide to our policy analysts and say, hey, what do you think? Now that's a pretty cool workflow, but that's also a pretty uncomfortable conversation. Because if you're in the business of writing guide policy, and I've just handed you, an entire section of the guide rewritten because of our call centers, you've got to start to rethink what that workflow is going to look like in the future. Now, we do not want computers writing our guide, let me be clear. But we do want all of that information that we're gathering from that voice data to influence ways to write a much better guide so that we have a much better customer experience. And so that's sort of where we are right now. How do you bring that technology in effectively where you still got that human in the loop driving the ultimate product?
You know, on this one, I think it's funny, the what's breaking inside the org chart. Well, one of the things that's breaking is the org chart, right? And this idea, I think we saw, was it Moderna who put HR and IT together, sort of envisioning this digital employee and whatnot. I think that as you bring agents in, it is difficult for people who run the operation, whatever the operation is, to look and see that and imagine that the thing that we're doing, well, I can do all of it, and actually I need to really do it differently when I've been doing it this way all along. And so we do see some resistance, like tremendous resistance at I don't know, you might call it the pocket veto level, right, at the mid-level manager that is just not sure what the incentive is, what the expectation is, that is holding up the unlock that occurs when I think, wait a minute, so accounts payable ought to be something completely different, right? The entire org chart of finance probably ought to be re-looked at, and that's hard to do in organizations. And actually, it probably brings up the bigger point, which is change is hard, right? Like the people part of these programs, which is kind of what you were talking about as well, is really difficult. The amount of dollars that typically organizations put into change is usually, it's kind of always the last negotiation point for anybody who's ever done this work. Well, we'll do this ourselves. And what invariably leads to programs not being successful, any kind of enterprise transformation, which agents moving into the organization is, by its definition, enterprise transformation. These are the hardest programs any organization does. They're the ones that typically fail, that under-deliver and whatnot, and it's not because the technology won't work, right? So anyway, I think that's kind of where I'm seeing it.
Our first agent in production, we went out on a bit of a limb. It is in our client-facing business, And it's to improve the consumption of our assessment business and the downstream coaching and development that comes from it. And it's to an end user who takes a Korn Ferry assessment to help them interact with something other than a PDF and wait for a human feedback. And we picked it for a bunch of different reasons. We picked it to really test this theory of, can we expand our impact? Can people who would typically either not get any advice and counsel on how they can be better in the workplace get that counsel, and do it in a way that wouldn't break the psychometric validity of it, or put people in a bad position. So we kind of went right to that sweet spot to learn a lot of stuff. It broke the org chart. It broke our service offering. Interestingly enough, and probably most importantly, our clients really like it. The individuals who got it, it served its purpose, but it's causing us to rethink the support and engineering. 75% of the engineering around that agent is bias, efficacy, and psychometric validity checking, much more so than the mechanics of putting the agent into production, because we're talking about somebody's ability to lead or manage. So I think we broke just about everything, but the important piece of that was, did it have the value we intended it to have? Because then you have a North Star to start solving for all the complexity that you've just introduced into the organization, to say nothing of causing I did a town hall with all of our coaches just to handhold them through that we weren't looking to replace them with agents, right off the bat, but that their role had to fundamentally change if they were going to survive.
Brian and I had a conversation, and I think, Nathaniel, we mentioned it as well. One thing we haven't heard a lot of discussion about in this conference is how different it is outside the US as well. And for those of us running global organizations or global programs, it's really lumpy as you move out, right? And there's been some interesting studies that have been done that say that in the developing world, even in Europe, there's less access to enterprise AI, but people are using it, and so that means that they're using their personal devices and whatnot, right? We know that people find their way to it. It is just interesting how lumpy that willingness to move forward or be as thoughtful. So when you're in a large organization with global processes or global pieces, keeping that in mind, that it's not the same. There's work councils here and these things. I mean, the lessons we've learned in traditional digital transformation serve us well, but it's still people, and moving it's really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's also a gap that is likely to expand before it contracts. Right now, you still have, we're close enough to the Big Bang that there's there's a lot of similarities as well. Yeah. But there's wildly different attitudes about how to handle these things in different groups. So there's almost like two big buckets that have been implicated in these conversations when it comes to these challenges. There's leadership, communication challenges, and then there's actual sort of structural challenges around making these changes, both of which I think are kind of amplified by the shift from assistant era AI to agentic AI.
Absolutely.
How much are you thinking about, talking about, discussing AI as digital employees versus sort of augmentations, not just tools, right? What is that mindset like? What does that create in terms of challenges with existing employees?
Well, again, the world's getting there faster in a lot of ways than the organizations are. It was less than 100 days ago that jobforagent.com popped up, the first job board where the candidates are expected to be agents, not for a job rec, not humans. So that started us off, and then of course the HCM companies put employee records in there. And Steve and I have had this conversation. I think there's a lot of efficacy to you select an agent, not dissimilarly to the way any talent acquisition function works. You give it context the way you train. You monitor its performance like you coach. So I think there are some interesting paradigms that are similar here. But what we're trying to do is adjust the human interaction there, because this all breaks if the remaining humans in the loop don't interact with these agents in the way that we expected to them. And since we're all experts at human-to-human collaboration and teaming and management, right? So we all know how easy that is. Getting our human population, and whoever thought we'd be in a world where you actually had to say your human population, aligned to the same idea is really job one, right? I mean, it's everything else can be solved, but how everybody else will interact and what it's going to do to management and what it's going to do to being a leader to us is still the first problem to tackle.
I'll give you a really specific case that I'm dealing with right now where I'm trying to change a lot of people's minds on this front. So we're a significant financial organization. We have a lot of models. We actually have a very important partnership with KPMG around model risk management. A lot of regulations we face were written before the advent of Gen AI. And if you think about your sort of college stats class, if you can take yourself back there and dealing with a cloud of data points, you're trying to draw that straight line through the ordinary least squares, which, by the way, is one matrix calculation. And I point that out because if you look at things like Grok 4 and the amount of math that's happening, these are $100 million training runs that are happening to estimate these models. It's just a very different thing we're talking about here when we deal with agents and LLMs and this type of modeling. And so I've been on this sort of mission to explain to people, I understand that we have a world where we manage our models through the lens of our history and our past. We're in a world now of multi-trillion parameter models. I think Opus 4 is, they won't announce it, but it looks like it's about 2.5 trillion parameters, same with Grok 4. They are third-party models. They are largely undocumented. They are unexplainable, right? We talked about this yesterday. The explainability issues, the non-deterministic nature of the models. They're just completely different animals to what we're used to. And you can't bring an old school view of model risk management to this world. You've got to think about it differently. And whilst I don't think we're there yet, I'm starting to think about exactly this topic, which is maybe we need to manage these things more like employees, right, than models, because frankly, when I hire a new employee, I don't put them in front of the CEO on the first day, right? And I have an employee code of conduct. And you start to think about all the controls you have in place when you have a massively complicated neural network that you're trying to manage. And that's kind of where we are.
Another interesting parallel that we talked about a little bit is how much you dictate how they have to accomplish the outcome versus giving them the outcome and then seeing how it goes, right?
Yeah.
I think with employees, human employees, we're much more used to maybe there's a set of standard operating procedures and kind of guardrails that create the framework in which they operate. But we give a lot of agency to people. In fact, star employees tend to be the ones who figure out ways to do things that are better. And one of the things that we're learning that's a very hard lesson with AI is we're so used to thinking about software as software that we tell it exactly what to do, that shifting the mindset to telling it what we want and letting it figure out the best way to do it it's a very important mindset shift, which I think dovetails with this idea of maybe treating these things more like digital employees.
But they're gullible. I just want to point this out.
Yeah.
They're a little different, so you have to be careful.
Not only are they gullible, I think actually that a lot of our assumptions about what the challenges were going to be, in practice we're finding simpler in some ways, but even more complex things. Yeah. So sycophancy is something that people are finally starting to talk about, where the default stance for almost every AI model is going to be to assume that when you're giving it something, that it's correct, right, and the right paradigm in which to operate. And that's a huge liability when it comes to actually getting work done well.
I love that one. If I could jump in, because it's real inside of Korn, Ferry. And again, I'll pick on that same business inside of the firm that does leadership assessment and professional development. We ran into that headlong. So we start using AI. One of our first really scaled use cases was in the compilation and correlation of these typically pretty large assessment reports that we tend to do on leaders. And first side-by-side compares as we were doing in the organization was, these people are coming out a lot better if we let the AI do it. I'm like, okay, well, that makes the individual happier. People like hearing that they're really great leaders. But fortunately, our risk management team stepped in and said, yeah, and it was this sycophant, I'm not going to do that as well as you do, issue that we had to really push our colleagues using these tools to challenge the result of the AI from that perspective, because we found at scale they were being way too nice.
Yep.
And it was an absolute real use case.
Here's the thing. I think interaction between people and their AI is far more polite than interactions between each other at times, somehow. I just maybe one additive point, because I agree with what's been said. When you look at in that same study that we do in the quarterly pulse survey, it's been really interesting to watch who's running the AI program at the company. It went from different people in the business, including the CEO running it, to nowadays it's almost entirely the CIO organization that's running the AI program. At least that's what's reported, which I think the CIOs have a really important role to play. But I think this idea of running a massive change program, that we're introducing a new kind of potentially employee or certainly roles that may not be necessarily, that may be too much to put on the plate, to also make the trains run, to get the technology out, and then also run an enterprise transformation. I just don't know if they have the space for that.
Where should it sit?
Well, I usually recommend, at least for now, if you're running enterprise transformation, you usually have a transformation leader that's been signaled to the organization, that makes the decisions, that's driving it. We've talked about it. We have a CAIO exchange about where does it sit, where does it land, and is there enough executive presence around it? I wanted to raise it just because I think. There's this been, I think Jensen Huang said this is going to be, IT is going to be the new HR, but I actually think HR is going to be the new IT in a way, if you think about it. Because of the things we need to go do feel a lot more like it. It's the point you've made. I've been on record of saying this for quite some time. I'm not talking about taskers and automators, the tools that will ultimately used by these things that will resemble more like an employee. I'll recognize it as a teammate. I think when we get to that stage, there's a lot of things that come into play, but certainly managing them more like an employee. But employee reviews become really important, and they probably happen all the time, right? In a way that they don't today. And who's responsible for it? And the other thing is, when you think about it as an employee, that means it might have employees, right? And you might be one of them, and that's a skill set our people aren't yet adapted to either, right? The agent boss.
I mean, to put an exclamation point on that and bring it back to Todd's 5 things to take home with you, our data shows that only 25% of organizations with AI programs are considering them as enterprise change programs.
Yeah, right.
They have that structure in place.
Yeah.
So
I think we're not talking
to
enough
do?
about that. That's a boardroom conversation.
Yeah.
That's an executive team conversation. We hear about tools demonstrations tend to do a lot, be what happens in the boardroom a lot. Or in the executive team, and I think maybe actually some of the lessons of like failed change programs in your own organization and dredging up the history of those. What would have been different? The training load to teach people how to interact in this new space and what their new jobs are going to be. I mean, it's just, that's the piece of the program. We've been saying it needs to be 50-50. How much you spend on tech, how much you spend on the people transformation.
Yeah, just to add sort of more fuel to that fire, there was this interesting moment where for a little while in 2024, people-related things, learning and development, training, all these sort of things had jumped up in priority among organizations. Those were conversations that were being had in the C-suite regularly. And boy, I felt this all last fall as agents came online. I just had this sense that as soon as agent capabilities were real, that was going to get kicked right on back down the field. They weren't going to care about that, and it was going to be all about what can agents do for me? How do we restructure based?
Take the blue pill; it'll be easy.
And that's pretty much what we've seen. There's been a wild overcorrection to that, I think.
Which is really interesting. I was saying this at breakfast. During the early stages of COVID, and for a lot of good leaders throughout, there was a very visceral reaction just to say, "Is everybody safe?" Yeah, everybody went out to their people and said, "Is everybody safe?" Right? I mean, now agents are here. All right, well, ripcord. Let's just see who we can rip.
I don't need those people anymore.
I think again, as leaders, going back, and if the only time you're telling your colleagues about AI is when you're doing the press release about how many jobs you're shedding yourself of. You should not be surprised that you're going to be one of those failed enterprise change projects in a year. It's just, but we do it. We know what that muscle is. We've all exercised that muscle fairly recently, but for some reason it seems to be fading into the background at the moment.
I think there's encouraging and discouraging parts of this discourse if you kind of zoom out and watch broadly. The discouraging part is that Wall Street this was always inevitable, but Wall Street is absolutely right now rewarding the ripping people out thing, which was going to happen. There's no way that wasn't going to happen. We were going to have to get through it. However, if you look at, I think it's positive in general that CEOs are having a more open conversation with their teams about what the real implications are. So the Shopify letter and Fiverr CEO, like those, I think that's healthy. Especially like the Fiverr letter was the most interesting to me because, there were a set of CEOs who wrote these big long letters about what their AI policy was going to be. But then it was really just to get to the last paragraph where they were like, by the way, you can't hire anyone if AI can do it. Whereas the CEO of Fiverr, he was just laying it out. He was like, I think it's coming for all of us. I think it's coming for me. We're not changing anything yet. You're all important to me, but let's come have a conversation. I think that is a good, healthy impulse. The other encouraging thing, if you look at some of the companies that have tried to lean most heavily on the trends to position themselves well, I'm thinking of Klarna specifically. Klarna basically went in and was like, we're going to do everything AI-ish as fast as we can. We're going to rip out 700 customer service employees and blah, 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 blah. And where they've sort of come back to is, I think, a very obvious place to me with customer service. But they realize that there are certain things that people just want humans for, right? And now they're in this mode where they're not thinking about strictly how much can agents replace customer service. They're thinking about what the right combination of agentic customer service delivery is and where humans should come in and what it looks like. And what's actually happening is that the humans that remain in those roles, it's actually turning into like a prestige position. It's more like luxury hospitality where no one kind of poo-poos on that type of customer service. Those are, lucrative, important positions where people are treated well and you have long, and so I think that you are, again, you move away from the finance guys who have, whatever, their particular priorities, and there is sort of a broadening of the conversation that could be healthy, but it's not going to be an easy one, because no one's in a position where they can say firmly, like flag in the ground, we're not going to fire anyone because of this. There's too much changing.
Well, and when we never did that with digital transformation either, right? I mean, it's like this is a consequence of efficiency moves that we've been making. I do think it's important. I still believe strongly, and I don't think that's what we heard yesterday when we start talking about this abundance culture we're headed to. I believe we will explode on the other side of this technological revolution with a tremendous job growth. I believe that. And I know agents sort of question it. Well, so what's that going to mean? I just really think that's going to happen because it's happened every other time. And we couldn't have really imagined the jobs that came up out of the internet or other things. It was going to be the end of consulting after Y2K and then what followed on, right? I think we've seen this before. I do think there's short-term dislocation that's happening a little faster than it's ever happened before. And I do think that's jarring, really jarring. And so a conversation's important. But I believe in the midterm opportunity is very bright.
And again, when it's disingenuous to say there's not going to be disruption. So that CEO that says, I'm with you, you're fine. But the construct of transparency and authenticity and having the conversation with your employees and engaging their voice in their own transformation pays dividends throughout this process. It'll get you there faster, even when the decisions are tough, right? Even when the decision is that there's job displacement. That engagement, which again, we all did not that long ago pretty damn effectively, we know how to lead through this. And that equivalency, I think, needs to be done more to get as quickly as you can to what is that new role? What is the vibe consultant? We're talking about vibe coding. What is the vibe consultant?
Yeah.
I think that's a hugely powerful role in the future.
Does that mean anyone can be a consultant? Is that what a vibe consultant is?
Yeah, it kind of does. Why not?
Maybe.
Why not?
Maybe. You got to, whatever the reality is, you got to be ready to deal with it.
Look, it's funny. I think almost every good conversation I have about AI in this context follows the exact same pattern that we just did, which is a set of technical questions that ultimately come back to human leadership organizational dynamics. And it's because those are the parts that it's so easy to get lost in because of, flashy capabilities increases in that. But the winners will be divided, I'm firmly confident, by how they handle this set of issues, not how good they are at adopting the fastest model, because that's going to be totally commoditized. Everyone's going to have access to every great model the instant they come out. It's going to be about how good the systems you have to put in there are. Speaking of that, I guess we're shilling based on.
We're going to draw people to our podcast, Daniel.
Steve, why don't you introduce?
I will do it. So many of you know, if you listen to Nathaniel's podcast, that we've been advertising with Nathaniel for a while, and some of us have been on his podcast, which has been awesome. He did tell me they're not the highest rated, which was a little heartbreaking.
Maybe among the interview shows. I think yours is higher than Rick Rubin's.
There you go.
Is it
there
bad
you go.
that I don't
There
hear
you
the
go.
KPMG?
Yeah, I feel a little bit better. But anyway, building on that, we decided to partner with Nathaniel to build a podcast called You Can with AI. And so it's a 7-part series, covers a bunch of enterprise adoption issues, some of the ones we talked about here. Let us know what your feedback is. We're, get on there, follow us. What is it? What raises it up? Subscribe to it. Yeah, that's the.
Now, what I thought was really cool about it was that I think that for a lot of the folks who are maybe in this room, you'll hear a lot of things that like resonate or comment like you've thought about. But what I think that the goal really is who you forward it to and the people that it goes next to. And we kind of designed it to be this really like compact package where you could send someone who, you're trying to get on board, someone in leadership, and say, listen to this end to end, and you're going to be, 90% farther than you were before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a change program, and one of the things that really moves people in our organization, one of the first things I do is, what podcasts are you listening to? When you go for a walk, what are you listening to? I mean, lots of us are Nathaniel listeners. There's other podcasts as well. This is going to be another one, we hope. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for this conversation. Great way to kick off this day.
Awesome.
And thanks all for having me.
Yeah, thank you.